Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today's episode is guaranteed to inspire awe as we travel to the Kingdom of Bhutan in the Eastern Himalayas, nestled between India and China. Bhutan is a place of deep spirituality, connectedness with nature, and rich culture. Through synchronicity, I was recently invited to join an epic adventure with Karen Dark, who you might remember from episode 7. And for me, it was an immediate yes. Bhutan is known for the concept of gross national happiness, where governmental and economic decisions are made based on their impacts on happiness. It's also the only carbon negative neutral country in the world. There's a unique culture in Bhutan and so much that we can learn from its people. I am so honored for the opportunity to visit later this year. Our guest today is Matt DeSantis, founder of MyBhutan, a boutique travel designer and outfitter that creates experiences that allow guests to explore deep into Bhutan. Matt has an absolutely incredible story that starts where he grew up in Connecticut and includes how he traveled to Bhutan for 4 weeks and ended up staying for 10 years. What Matt has been able to accomplish during his time there is astounding, to say the least. According to his LinkedIn profile, he's a travel specialist, a technologist, a social entrepreneur, and an explorer. And he is a huge inspiration to me and has so kindly agreed to join us here to share his incredible story. Matt, welcome to the campfire.
Thank you for having me, Scott. And that was a very kind introduction. And you described Bhutan very well. It's a very difficult place to describe, and you described it very well.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much. I am so excited to share your story, Matt. You and I had an opportunity to speak for a while last week, and just every adventure and all of the accomplishments that you've been able to get done while you've been over there in Bhutan has just been incredible. And I just can't wait to share your stories. I'd love to just go straight back to your early days in Connecticut, because I think that story that you shared with me just inspired me so much. And if you could just tell us kind of how this all happened.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I've lived in Bhutan for over a decade now, but my relationship goes back to my childhood. I went to a boarding school in Connecticut called Choate Rosemary Hall, and there I met His Royal Highness Chigelugan Wangchuk. We originally met on the basketball court and had a very competitive relationship at the beginning that formed through the years into a very long-standing, true relationship with each other. And shortly after our time at Choate together, and obviously I would hear stories of Bhutan, but had never visited at that point. But hearing it through his words and his vision, and just through someone who loves Bhutan even more than himself, and the way that he really cares about everything about Bhutan's development and existence, it really had a strong impact on me even before being there myself.
Yeah.
But all that being said, after meeting in high school, we went separate ways. He went off to Oxford. I was at Columbia, and shortly after that, while I was working with Accenture, my professional career began with Bhutan, just as Bhutan was going through its transition from a monarchy to a democracy. I was just asked for gratis to build systems to support the government in its transition. And so my professional work with Bhutan began in my early 20s, and it was really just building systems from afar for various different ministries. And that led to the decision or the invitation to go over to Bhutan just to meet all of the ministers for what was supposed to be 4 months. 4 weeks. And of course, that's a tough thing to do when you go to Bhutan, to stay only 4 weeks.
Such a crazy story. So, this goes back to your like 14 years old at Choate Rosemary Hall, and and you make this lifelong friend, and you go through the educational system, and you find yourself at Accenture as a technology consultant, and this invitation to Bhutan probably, I'm assuming, develops outside of because of your relationship with His Royal Highness and the learning that you had through that relationship.
Correct. And we always shared ideas together that were very abstract and more larger scale for national development type of priority work, which I eventually did end up getting into. But at the time when we started to build those systems, it was really something that was of high importance because it was a young and developing new form of governance, and so it was a really fun project to be on because it was uh, those opportunities come very rarely to be able to support the development of a transitioning government.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, this is big stuff. I mean, there's a global impact that's happening with the work that you're doing. But to me, like, it starts with two boys, two teenagers, right, that are just close friends. I mean, what was that like? That sort of high school experience and that relationship that developed.
I think it was a great learning experience for both of us because we were exposing each other to completely different environments and sharing them together. And the stories that he'd tell me about Bhutan, for example, I could feel the love and passion through every one of his words, but I had never experienced it myself physically. But the way that he would explain to me everything from the way that Bhutan develops and its policies and its priorities, its national priorities for well-being, um, were so intriguing to me because while I felt them, it was a practice that I had never seen, for example, a government installing. And to be able to learn that at such a young age, but to actually learn it through words and not through seeing it, and then years later going to see it myself made a really strong impact. And the same on the other hand, the experience that His Royal Highness had in the United States to be able to experience life in a different way than how he had been, you know, born and raised to experience it in the kingdom. So it was it was it was a friendship that was filled with a lot of shared experiences and teachings from one to another, and as I mentioned, it started on the basketball court, and it wasn't the strongest friendship at the beginning. So we always had a competitive drive against us too, but that competitive drive really molded through the years as we continued to develop ideas together and really worked to its advantage in helping us really be creative and push towards things we really believed in.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a beautiful thing. I mean, you guys were there together, kind of like helping each other to understand one another's culture, and that, like, it sounds like that created an awareness for the both of you, which is really special. And so I want to hear about this, this 4 weeks that turns into 10 years. Like,
Sure.
when you first got that invitation, what was that like for you? The invitation to come over, like, what was going through your mind at that time? And, what did you think was about to happen?
Well, I had no idea when I first left that I was going to stay in Bhutan for more than the 4 weeks. I think that was the last thing that was on my mind. I took the long road there. I had a friend who also worked with Accenture at the time, and he decided to leave the job and to go and hike in the mountains, to hike through the Pyrenees, to
Mm.
transverse them. And we had been reading this old book by a man who had uh, trekked across the Pyrenees, I think 16 times, but it was years back, 30, 40 years prior to the time we ended up going and doing it. And he had this idea to go and follow that book and to try to recreate that path.
Wow.
And so he invited me to join. And at the time, I had never been in the mountains before. I grew up a big water person. I loved, bigger wave surfing, and I loved being in the ocean, but I had never grown up near the mountains at all. And so the plan was actually to spend 40 plus days crossing the Pyrenees and then head over to Bhutan afterwards. And obviously, that journey through the Pyrenees was a real eye opener for me, and really prepared me for a lot of the work I ended up doing in life later. And but I had never been in the mountains before, so it was a really exciting time filled with some challenges. And but by the time I reached Bhutan, again, as I had mentioned, I had only thought that I would be there for 4 weeks. But right when I arrived, the royal bodyguards picked me up, and the next thing I knew, that evening I was near to the southern jungle. And then the next 8 weeks we spent just crossing the jungle and meeting different villages, um, and exploring Bhutan through really the footsteps of how His Royal Highness explored it when he was a child. And I didn't realize it at the time, but many of my early adventures in Bhutan, when we'd go to different parts of the country, largely places that were very less traveled, His Royal Highness would explain to me that these were places that he would go with his father, His Majesty, when he was younger. And he was, to be able to see it through, my friend's eyes from his childhood was even more powerful to me. So
Yeah.
the 4 weeks was an impossibility from the beginning, because I didn't even make it to a meeting until the first 8 weeks.
So at what point did you realize like this isn't going to be 4 weeks?
I think right when I entered the jungle, to be honest with you.
Okay.
It's such a beautiful, the thing about Bhutan is I mean, there are many things, but one of the beautiful things about Bhutan is its mutual respect for the environment,
Mm-hmm.
and just the way that the people and the nature around the people um, interact with each other is so harmonious in many ways that it's like nowhere else I've ever been. And so Bhutan you have to keep in mind that Bhutan, the northern part of Bhutan, you essentially reach the Tibetan plateau, but then the southern part of Bhutan, you hit the Indian basin. So if you look at Bhutan on a 3D map, Bhutan is really this slope. And then you have just beautiful valleys and glacial rivers carving their way through, and all these different altitudes, and everything from high glaciers to, as I mentioned, really the deepest, most untraveled rainforests in the world. And so this is why Bhutan is one of the 10 hottest biodiversity, or the 10 biggest hot biodiversity hotspots in the world.
Yeah.
So I'd say right when I started to see just how beautiful the outdoors are in Bhutan, and then connecting that with the communities and seeing how that outdoors works so well with the people who live around them. And you see it in the everyday nature of the people. It's just so heartwarming being around anyone in Bhutan, just because of the spirit of Bhutan and its people.
Yeah. There's this point at which you're in the jungle and you're like, okay, this isn't going to be 4 weeks. I'm wondering, and I'm sure my listeners are too, like, what about your family back in the United States? Like, what are they thinking? Like,
Sure. Yeah, I had to give that call. That wasn't a very pleasant call the first time. But they were very supportive, obviously, and it's a challenging thing, just mindfully to have so much of your life and your relationships and your everything that you had developed to date in one country, and then go and establish something somewhere else for a long period of time. And especially the added challenges of leaving, from an economic perspective, a largely developed country, and going and helping essentially create an industry elsewhere.
yeah, that's the amazing part. That's just so cool. Like, so, I know the invitation sounds like it was to go over and help with technology essentially. But you also, you mentioned that you'd never been in the mountains before. But Matt, you have become an award-winning world-class explorer. And that happened during this whole experience. And I just have to believe that there was something in your heart beyond technology that, like, yes, you got the invitation, but there had to have been something deeper calling you to say, yes, like, this is something I need to go do.
I've always been driven to go and make impactful type of exploration in different parts of the world. And whether that be storytelling or scientific research or some type of community involvement related exploration, I think I've done across that map quite a few. But what intrigued me most about Bhutan is, one, just from a exploration perspective in general, you have a lot of opportunity. You have everything from the high mountains, which once you get past the military checkpoint in northern Bhutan is probably the least explored regions of the Himalayas that still exist today. And then you have all of the river systems, which have been, which we've done a lot of work mapping a lot of the system, a lot of the rivers that hadn't been mapped before, and doing rafting expeditions through them.
Mhm.
And you have the southern rainforest. And I mentioned before how well protected it is. The southern rainforest is essentially half of it is royal property, and the other half is open to the public. And so the rangers do tremendous work in that park to just protect a lot of the wildlife. And it's for that reason that you have a very large number of endangered animals there, and they're living peacefully for the most part. And so the opportunity for exploration is really high in Bhutan, and it's also just because of access. Previously hadn't really been done much before. And then, but for me, that's not enough. And so adding these scientific research components or opportunity for, the younger generation to be able to be involved and either provide a good or create a good scientific impact on whatever work we do, or to give them the opportunity to, if the youth are involved, to see and experience their country in a different way. So that's what really inspires me to get out and go into the more extreme environments, I suppose.
Yeah. And so I think I'm kind of seeing sort of two paths, because I know there's the exploration piece, but you also have like a deep passion for entrepreneurial efforts. And I want to get into both of them, so just for listeners can kind of understand both of those, because you've got sort of a number of different entrepreneurial ventures that you've taken on over there. But then there's also the exploration piece, and I'd love to kind of get into how those two tie together. But just to bring everybody into context, can we just go back to the entrepreneurial piece, MyBhutan, and some of the other ventures that you've created? Can you kind of give us some background there?
So what we've done is we have two companies. One is MyBhutan, which was co-founded by myself and His Royal Highness in 2013, and that's the travel group that provides deep exploration opportunities in Bhutan. And we try to mix that a lot with shared experiences, because the early days, before MyBhutan was even formed, we were still doing travel programs in Bhutan, just unofficially, but we were doing it with high interest guests to Bhutan. And the idea was to build shared experiences. And so we were introducing them to private projects and giving them pretty special access to see the country from the way that, the people around me see it, and the way that it was introduced to me as well. And so the travel group has been very bespoke for a reason, and boutique for a reason. We're not ever looking to really grow to extreme boundaries, but the idea is to build relationships and to introduce Bhutan in a very pure and authentic way. Now, we also have a company called Bayul Labs, which built Bhutan's international payment gateway. Okay. So prior, you could only accept wire transfers to Bhutan. So on the tech side, we built a platform that that can be used by Bhutan to, for the first time, accept international payments. Now, that's also something that can be replicated to other countries, and you'd be surprised how many countries have that issue. So that's on the business side. Now, in addition to that, we serve a few other roles. As part of MyBhutan, and this was just a core decision that His Royal Highness and I made at the very early days, because I was making the decision to go and live very far from, at the time, what was my home in the United States, and His Royal Highness was involved in the project as well, and so we needed to create a reason for MyBhutan that was well beyond just being a startup business. And so what we decided was that a core part of what we do would found, fund, and implement different projects, which would be community benefit projects or environmentally benefit projects. And so over the course of the 10 years, we've been involved in various projects, but the four that I will mention are really the key ones that we've been focusing on through the long term. One is a very historic project for Bhutan. It's co-led by myself and one of the princesses, and the royal grandmother is the honorary patron to the project. But we're documenting, digitizing, and archiving all of Bhutan's national relics across 2,500 monasteries. So
Yeah, it's amazing.
this is a mega project, and multi-lifetime project probably, but it's been an amazing experience because we have monks learning data structures while they're teaching me the whole reincarnation cycle, because I know this is going to take multi years.
Yeah.
Lifetimes. And so that project's very important, with 2,500 monasteries and objects in the tens to hundreds in each monastery.
Yeah, I have to just reflect there for a second, because what you experienced with His Royal Highness in high school was this integrating and awareness of each other's sort of cultures, and now here you are, just you're explaining that same story with the monks and how they are sharing and you're sharing. It's just it's so magical.
Yeah, and and I'm very grateful for that, because it's obviously difficult to really just find yourself being accepted into any community that you're not originally from. But I remember the early days when His Royal Highness, when I first arrived, and he sat me down with his close friends and said, this is my brother and he's your brother now too. And I'm always appreciative for that, because it was a welcoming, and it allowed for both me to feel personally welcome and make it a home, but also to be accepted, right? So
there's such an unbelievable unity in that, and I love it. I mean, that right there is a lesson for the world. It's beautiful. So we've got this National Relics project, and then
we have that project, and then the other three projects. One is a tree planting project, and what we're doing is we're working on two fronts here. One is for reforestation, and there's an old ancient trail called the Trans-Bhutan Trail, which was just revived. It had been it had essentially stopped. It had really overgrown and died out over the last, I'd say, 60 years since the highway was introduced to Bhutan. And it was such an important trail for cultural reasons and also for trade. But it's disappeared. And so it was fortunately revived over the past 2 years during the pandemic. And so we're working on a reforestation project with the Trans-Bhutan Trail team, where we're providing tree saplings and helping with planting so that we can reforest areas that have degraded land along the trail. And then the other portion of that project is actually a fruit-bearing tree project. And we're doing that both with farmers on their individual properties, but then as well, we're doing it with the central monastic body. And so we're doing it at monasteries, and we're doing fruit-bearing trees on their land, and then the monks become the caretakers of those trees. And the purpose of that project is to revive an old practice where these fruit-bearing trees used to provide a source of income for the monasteries. And we're always trying to find ways to provide sources of income for the monasteries in Bhutan, and this one seems to be a viable one. So we're excited to have that one up and running again.
Yeah, and you were mentioning when we spoke last week that all of these projects, the idea is to get them started and then turn them back over to the people that it's benefiting, and I think that's just really amazing.
Correct. So we found, fund, and implement them, but we always hand it to a respective party who we work with along the way as we're found, funding, and implementing. And then we hand it off to a respective party and only provide support after that in whichever ways we see are helpful, if any. But the whole purpose here is to really inject this work into the community and have them become the respective and rightful owners, because it's for them and it's needed. And so it's been really I think that's the most important part of all of these projects.
Yeah.
And it's really been the most, just personally, I think the most life-changing in a way, because it's given from an inner perspective more reason for the work that we do every day.
Because of the individuals and the people that it's impacting, the work that you guys
Correct.
are doing. I mean, and to tack on to that in terms of impact, the reforestation project that you're doing, I mean, that lines right up with the Bhutan being carbon neutral. I mean, that's a core fundamental aspect of that whole.
Correct. And there are a few components of this as well. You had mentioned about Bhutan being carbon negative, but it's also, I believe, the only country in the world that has protection of its forests in its constitution, where 60% of all land area must be forest coverage. So right now we're 71 to 73%, which is great. We're exceeding the requirement, but Bhutan continues to globalize and to expand beyond its boundaries in many ways. And just looking at the capital city from the day I arrived, and it was 70,000 people who lived there, to now probably around 130,000, things are growing fast.
Yeah.
And so it's very important to, I think, proactively be tackling issues, even if they're not perceived as major issues right now. It's something that's important, because you look at just globally the warming planet, and even if Bhutan is the carbon negative country in the world and has policy to protect its environment, we still see the effects of it, because we are one, we're the highest country in the world altitude wise, but two, you have a lot of glaciers in Bhutan, and with a lot of glaciers, you have a lot of glacial lakes. And when the world is warming, and the lakes get bigger and the glaciers get smaller, and that could create issues like flooding or catastrophes. So it's very important that we serve as an example to the world, because even if we are caring for our environment in a very unique way, we still see the effects of the warming planet.
Yeah, it's hard when you're a small country and you're sandwiched in between two countries that are creating a lot of pollution.
Correct.
Yeah. So okay, we've got a few other ventures that you've worked on or that are still working on.
The last two are I founded and chair, and His Royal Highness is the honorary chairman, the Explorers Club Bhutan chapter.
Yeah.
So that's been a really fun initiative. We have about 15 to 20 members, and you can just imagine just very unique talent within that membership. Everything from the person who led the first project to bring a satellite from Bhutan to space, to a number of rangers doing exceptional work that involve botany, geologists, you name it. We also introduced a very new concept to exploration, which to me is very important because I think that the former concept of exploration just globally has always kind of been this type of conquer style exploration. I'm the first to go and do this or the first to do that. And it's always been physical exploration. Now, we have in Bhutan a very unique body of people called, in the central monastic body. And these are these reincarnated monks who have explored multiple lifetimes of human being and soul, and being able to figure out, how to live with impermanence and how to find and seek enlightenment. And the mind works in a very powerful way when you give the time to focus on that. And so we've created a really unique exception to, I think, what exploration was always perceived to be. And this was through conversation with the headquarters at the Explorers Club, but we were able to get members into the club who are reincarnated monks. And I remember the early days, one of the Explorers Club members who's a reincarnated monk told me, well, I don't qualify because I've never gone and climbed mountains or rafted these rivers. And but his exploration runs deep, and what he can share as an explorer is something that many of us are very blinded to.
Yes.
And so we're trying to learn and implement these processes with even our physical expeditions that we do as a team to determine ways to incorporate more spiritual and mindful exploration into that. And our hope is that it will help us become more aware of all of our work as in our expeditions.
It's a game. That's a game changer. I mean, it's opening up a whole nother. I mean, it's always been this outer exploration, and you're taking it to the inner, and I mean, just that opens up a whole nother category. It's amazing.
Correct. And also, how does that even benefit your physical explorations? If you're doing meditative practices before you go out and do a physical expedition, does that help? Does that open your awareness differently? Do you see what you're looking for differently? So it's all this concept of being connected and having this interconnectedness with everything around you. And that's a lot of the practice in itself. So by creating that interconnectedness with your physical expeditions, how does that help your research?
Yeah, it's going to change a lot of things for a lot of people. It's going to change the way people think. I mean, it's a whole nother category. So we've got a couple of other things to talk about that you're working on.
Yeah, and then so the last two things are, one is it involves youth in sports, but when I met His Royal Highness, as I mentioned, we met on the basketball court. And he would always beat me by a little bit. He would always beat me by a point or two.
Yeah.
And so it's his responsibility to grow sports in Bhutan. He's the president of the Bhutan Olympic Committee. And so when I came to Bhutan, originally I just thought it would be a little backyard activity, but it ended up 800 kids were showing up by the second or third week. But I brought baseball to Bhutan 10 years back, and I would joke about it and say that I would bring it because it was a sport that I could beat him in finally.
I love it. Yeah.
But that wasn't the reality. The real reality was because it was something that the kids just picked up really fast. They were great at, and they loved, because extracurricular activities in Bhutan, especially in the capital city, to be able to find one that's free and just open every day for you to just show up and play is very rare, or show up and do anything really. And so it created a really nice opportunity for these kids to be able to just learn a new sport, meet friends across different schools, and have fun. And so we've developed the program into a national sport now. It's the 17th national sport, and it's become internationally recognized. So the World Baseball and Softball Confederation has recognized it as an international federation, and we are in 6 districts of the 20 now, but we hope to get into all of them because we have kids writing to us every day, essentially telling us that they want to play baseball in their communities. So it's been a fun project, and we've been happy to see it grow, and we've been overwhelmed by the support that we've been given.
Yeah, I mean, and overwhelm is a great word. I mean, it's got to be so much fun to see the smiles on these kids' faces playing baseball.
It is,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's fun too, because as I mentioned, Bhutan being one of the highest country, or the highest country in the world, it has a little international appeal because baseballs get hit farther when it's high altitude.
Oh,
So,
this is true. Yeah.
yeah, so we
Good
posted
point.
a few photos on Reddit, and they had a lot of little mini viral push to it because people were excited and interested to see if Mike Trout arrived in Bhutan, how far would he hit the
That's
baseball?
awesome. Little easier to get a home run, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, cool. Okay, so you have kind of one more role that you play.
The last is just a volunteer role, and that's just or that is working with basically supporting any Americans in country who have any issues. But I'm the U.S. warden to Bhutan, so I facilitate a lot of the um, conversations between anyone in any Americans in Bhutan and the U.S. State Department if there are any issues. And just because of the nature of my relationship with all of the parties involved, I also help with various other things between the two parties. Everything from certain contributions that have been made, solar city projects, wildlife protection work, and other forms of development between the two parties. So, yeah, you name it.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much in all of that. And so, Matt, like one of the things we talked about when we spoke last week, you grew up in the Northeast in the United States, you go to high school in Connecticut, and now all of a sudden you're in Bhutan. And I mean, I think for a lot of listeners, it's going to be hard to get their heads around what a massive thinker you are. It's hard for me to get my head around what a massive thinker you are. Like your ability to think on such a global scale and to be able to tackle such big issues. How did your mind get to that point? Like, can you take us kind of through, like, how does one develop that ability to think on such a grand scale?
Well, thanks, Scott. I think that just it's been a maturing process throughout. But I look back at the early days when I was working um, in the States with, say, Accenture, and I was very happy and satisfied with the work and learned a tremendous amount. But I always felt that if I had done that my whole life, that while I would live very comfortably, I wouldn't feel satisfied completely in the end, because I didn't feel that what I was doing was really building anything beyond what I had intended to build for myself.
Mhm.
And just personally, that isn't enough of a drive to do what I do every day. And so that was the early feelings, but it took time to, I guess, have the courage to go and take that jump, because you you spend years developing yourself into something that can, you spend years developing yourself into one thing, and then if you find that it isn't fully satisfying, it's always a little scary to take that jump.
Yeah.
And so that was the early stage. But then I tell you that when I first arrived in Bhutan, I remember presenting business plans, for example, to the government. And while it was very um, well received for many reasons, my mind frame was very, what was very focused on what I had learned prior to that. And, it was, how do we create the most economic value for this project? But while that was very well received, as I mentioned, it wasn't the full spread of interest in Bhutan. And so
Mhm.
the response I would get was, well, this is wonderful, but how do we incorporate value into this for the environment? And how do we make sure that culture is respected and preserved? And how do we make sure that there's no corruption with governance?
Yeah.
And so looking at it more holistically, I think really helped with all of future planning and business development, and really every action that we did as a team moving forward, because it allowed us to really um, understand why we were doing it. And once we started to develop programming into our work that was beyond our personal interests, we started to form even better as a team, and our interests became more mutual, and we became better at what we did.
There was a shared purpose, and there was something bigger than just yourself.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. Well, I feel like we've got so much more to cover, and I think we could probably have a couple of more podcast episodes. I definitely want to just touch on the exploration piece, because we've talked about sort of the entrepreneurial path, but exploration has also been such a huge piece for you. As I understand it, Bhutan is an area that has a lot of uncharted territory by man and technology, and you're one of the few people, if any, that has explored that region. And there's just exploration runs in your blood, and I just love to hear like how you've kind of integrated kind of both of those paths, the entrepreneurial plus the exploration piece.
Well, I certainly like to go places that are, extreme and require, or could value or could benefit from different types of surveying or research, or new projects. So, and Bhutan is really a wonderland for that, because there are so many areas that are so largely unexplored compared to the rest of the world. So I think one of it's just, I was fortunate and lucky to be positioned in a place where I had the opportunity to do that. And the second is, the way that we've integrated it. One, on those project based, where we mentioned the nonprofit projects that we work on, we've done various in pretty remote areas, and that's allowed us to go and, have a little fun with the exploration as
Yeah.
well. And but the other is, we do have this unique access, and we are experts in providing these extreme journeys and expeditions. So on the MyBhutan side, we do bring select guests to certain regions, and we've basically created a part of the industry for the high adventurous traveler that didn't even exist in Bhutan before, where we'll spend 8 months building out expeditions and wrecking them and making sure that they're both safe, but also extraordinary in many ways, so that we can have clients for the first time go and do them. And so everything from the high mountains to the river systems to the jungles, you name it, we love getting out there, and that's a major passion. So but then the other thing I'd say is, I went back to say that I was fortunate to be put in that situation. Obviously, I think everywhere I've taken myself in life, I've always tried to find those places, even beyond Bhutan, that really were unique and restricted in many ways, and to do projects that bring value to it, rather than just go and, as we mentioned, that conqueror style expedition, but bring value in what we're doing as we're there. But exploration is a very beautiful thing where you don't really um, even have to adventure very far to find exploration. There are adventures everywhere, and so when I have heard people tell me in the past that I've been fortunate to be able to explore so much in my lifetime, and I definitely am thankful for that. My response is always that there's so much to explore everywhere, and
Hmm.
it's really an innate characteristic of every human. I mean, it's essential for the survival of mankind. It's essential for the survival of wildlife. It's essential for all of the interlinking of planets and other planets. And, that's why we explore. And so everyone's adventure plays a part in that.
I love that so much. And this is exactly why, Matt, we have to follow that voice that calls us to adventure. And that's what this podcast is all about. So that was just so beautifully said. I appreciate it so much. I do feel like we're going to have a round two here, but there's a group of us that are coming out to see you all in Bhutan this fall. And I would love for you to just briefly share what's in store for us when we get there.
Sure. And I think that we can actually piggyback off of the conversation we were talking about with the mindful exploration
Hmm.
on this front and being able to apply the physical exploration with mindful. But, the way that I see the program that we've built together is while it definitely has a very deep look from a physical perspective of Bhutan, we've tied in a lot of um, um, real, I guess, masters in Bhutan on the spiritual front. And so, my excitement about what we're going to be doing this fall and possibly in the spring as well is it's a very deep spiritual exploration that is very physical based. And I think that that's a very beautiful way to experience Bhutan because you know Bhutan people people go for two reasons. They either go because they love the outdoors and they want to see the culture and the festivals
Hmm.
and this unique culture interests them, or they go because they understand that it's the last Shangri-La and they understand that once you get deep into central Bhutan, you're in the heartland of really Vajrayana Buddhism. And so being able to connect those two with the right people and to be able to see that physical exploration from a spiritual sense, I think will be very strong. And Karen, as you had mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
she's very keen on helping everyone find their own journeys through that journey.
Yes.
And so I think it's going to be a very powerful time together.
Yes.
I'm excited
Yes.
for it.
Thank you. I'm so excited, and there's going to be so much sharing. Matt, what's the best place for people to get a hold of you or to find out more about My Bhutan and the journeys and adventures that you put together for people?
Sure. So we have our website is mybhutan.com,
Okay.
mybhutan.com.
Hmm.
And then the email address, the easiest way to contact us, and this is a joint address for myself and a few other team members, is contact@mybhutan.com.
Awesome. And we'll be posting all that in our show notes, along with some pictures and a couple of videos that introduce folks to Bhutan. And as they kind of get to know who you are, there's a whole lot more that we didn't even touch. So excited to bring more. And I'm sure when we come back from Bhutan, there'll be another podcast episode to go over our journey. But Matt, I want to finish with a couple of fun questions that I ask everybody. And so, here in the US, Hollywood loves to like blow these kinds of stories up, and you're somebody for sure that Hollywood's going to make a movie about someday. So what we want to know is when they do, who's going to be the Hollywood actor that plays you?
I'll give you a couple things here. So so His Royal Highness always tells me that Marco Polo reminds me of him.
Nice.
So, or reminds him of me.
Nice. Yeah.
And so maybe that the actor in that TV show,
Okay.
or maybe we could bring Brad Pitt did the
There we
7
go.
years in Tibet. So
There we go. Okay.
maybe we can get him back to Bhutan. But really, actually, to be honest with you, I think like a complete unknown, because that's in many ways what, you know, this full 10-year journey has really entailed, right? So it's always kind of diving into the unknown. And so I think it might be most fitting if it was just a complete unknown actor.
I love it. Okay. Well, what's your movie going to be called?
There's, have you ever heard of Bayul?
Yeah. Well, that's the payment company, right?
That's the name of the payment company. But Bayul is, what it actually means is it means hidden lands.
Ah.
And the idea of a Bayul is that once you've it can be a constant search in your life to find bayous, but bayous are physical lands that are unseen until you can see them.
Mm.
And it takes both physical and internal presence to find these bayous. I think that the real, the place is the most special part of this story rather than the person.
Yeah.
And so I'd say something like Into the Bayou or something.
I love
Because
that.
Bhutan, in a really beautiful way, is a Bayou in so many ways.
Bayou. And I just learned a new word, and it's a great word. I'm going to use it. Into the Bayou. Well, Matt, I want to thank you so much for spending time with me today. I am so excited to come and visit Bhutan later this year. And for those listening, I hope that you have been inspired today as much as I have. I hope that Matt's story has encouraged you to listen to that voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or you need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thank you for listening. Matt, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Scott.